Well, good evening. My name's Dan Collison. I'm the senior pastor at First Covenant Church, as well as the executive director of the East Downtown Council. And those two hats, to me, are a distinct privilege when it comes to tonight's topic. As a pastor of the church, we have been a dynamic and growing multiracial congregation that is engaged in social justice. We have the privilege of having Professor Nekima in our midst, coaching, teaching, leading. She is a mentor of mine. And in fact, I want to say thank you, Nekima, for your leadership and for tonight's conversation and for organizing many events, not just this event, around this topic. And thank you to the panelists who will be introduced in just a little bit. We are grateful to have you here. You represent thousands of hours of expertise, and your message is going to go beyond just tonight, even with the important topic that we're talking about. And thank you who have just come out to listen and participate around this important topic. I do want you to know, just so you wonder, some people say East Downtown Council. Well, I didn't know there was a West Downtown Council or a North Downtown Council. And I just want you to know that the East Downtown Council is the business association in the 100 blocks that are the east part of downtown. And 4 years ago, we were really a wonderful group of folks who were gathering to organize the neighborhood and businesses. 4 years later, $2 billion of development and projected projects. We're now a different organization. And technically, I am working in a dual staff role as the executive director of the East Downtown Council and the Downtown Council with Steve Kramer, who's the CEO, working on public realm, working on catalyzing some of the broader initiatives like the 2025 plan that has a number of things to grow the downtown. And this topic has cycled into those conversations, and it is important that you know that I carry this as a passion for how we shape the built environment, how we build neighborhoods, and I am so pleased to find convergences with First Covenant hosting the National Association of Minority Contractors Resource Center in this building. Proximity matters, and it's a privilege to be able to create that partnership such that there's space just feet away from all of this development. And on a personal level, it is a privilege of mine to do whatever I can to connect all the voices such that we can become truly more equitable in what happens in East Downtown. And the final thing I'll just say is that in my mind, it is both my Christian faith that has this passion for a just society that's committed to human flourishing. But I think anyone, whether you come from a faith background or not, should be engaged in this for the purpose of all people who call themselves Minnesota citizens and people who are shaping society. And I am fascinated by the great philosopher Aristotle, who clearly articulated this idea. It's called magnificence. Magnificence, which is an ethical idea linked to money. And here's the idea. A magnificent person or organization is one that knows that while an expenditure should be large, it should also be appropriate to whoever is spending it, the circumstance, and the object of the expense. And so the new and large construction projects, small construction projects, these are expenditure opportunities that Minnesotans can and should leverage in order to change the dismal trajectory of our current economic and racial disparities that not only overlay construction, but education and housing and healthcare and food security and homelessness and everything that shapes the whole of society. But we need to examine, and that's what part of tonight is about, and then I'm going to get out of the way, the trail of resources and relational capital through the networks of leadership and key redevelopment partner organizations so that everyone, particularly those spending public money, considers new ways to have meaningful dialogue and make strategic changes in labor practices such that we will all lead to more magnificently equitable outcomes.
Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege and honor to be here and to have you all here to engage in this important discussion entitled Seizing the Moment, Building Equity in Construction. So for those who care about the construction industry and even those who are new to the industry, we realize that there's a significant problem. While, as Pastor Dan mentioned, there are billions upon billions of dollars in construction that are currently happening in the region and that are expected to happen over the next 8 to 10 years, people of color are being left behind in the industry, particularly in terms of gaining access to contracts through their businesses, as well as barriers that laborers of color face. I don't know how many times I've driven through parts of the Twin Cities and seen all white construction crews in 2014. I don't know how you all feel, but that raises some red flags in terms of what types of barriers exist to ensuring that there's equity in the field of construction, and at the same time, what opportunities exist to level the playing field and open the doors to access to opportunity. So tonight we're going to dive into some of these questions. We have a fantastic panel who's here to share their experiences and their expertise in this area. We will also have some questions that I'm going to pose to the panel, and we're going to open it up for audience participation as well. We want this to be a community dialogue that sparks ideas and hopefully encourages us to rise up and do our part in challenging the status quo. The longer that we remain silent when we see injustice, the more we can expect the injustices to continue. And it's going to take all of us lending our voices if we're going to change things. So with that, I want to welcome our esteemed panel and call them up, starting with Avi Vishwanathan, who is an organizer at Hire Minnesota, Jesse Kingston, who is the head of the Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity Department in the city of St. Paul, Kevin Lindsay, who is the Commissioner of Human Rights for the state of Minnesota, Lenny Chisholm, who is a business owner and a community member who's constantly advocating around issues of equity in construction, Kim McCraley, who is the head of the National Association of Minority Contractors, Minnesota chapter, and is also a business owner, and Keith Baker, who is the chair of the minority-owned business and economic development group within Everybody In. We also are privileged to have with us Ms. Julie Nelson, who runs the newly founded Government Alliance for Racial Equity. She is the former head of the Civil Rights Department for the city of Seattle. She's also a senior fellow at the Haas Institute in Berkeley, California. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panel. So what we're going to do tonight is to have each of the panelists introduce themselves more fully and provide a 5 to 7 minute opening statement where they can lay out the issue, lay out their perspectives surrounding what we're talking about here tonight. And then I will follow up with some questions. The panelists will also have the chance to engage each other. If something jumps out at one of you, feel free to respond and also to pose questions to others on the panel. So is there someone who would like to go first? All right, we will start with Avi. You know, I'm a professor, so I call on people when there are no hands in the air. So we'll start with Avi.
Reminds me of law school days when the professor would just look around and point. You're up. And then when you wouldn't say anything for 10 seconds, they just move on. My name's Avi Vishwanathan. I am the Hire Minnesota campaign director. Hire Minnesota is a campaign that works to reduce racial disparities in employment by holding contractors and government agencies accountable to hiring goals that have been set on construction projects, on publicly funded construction projects. We've been around for just about 6 years, almost 6 years now, which seems like an eternity in times of campaigns such as this. As you know, coalitions come and go and campaigns move on, but we're still moving, finding new places to go and new targets that we seek as we try and advocate for communities of color and workers of color to get onto these projects. So when we started about 6 years ago, Hire Minnesota was really focused on industries and areas where we saw that there would be potential for job growth, construction being one of those, and now we see how that boom is coming along. We wanted to see places where more jobs are going to be created and opportunities for more people of color to get those jobs. The impetus for this being that Minnesota and the metropolitan area here are having the worst racial disparities in employment of any metro region in the country. We looked at this as an angle and a place where we had leverage because we were talking about publicly funded projects in a place where people's tax dollars were going into. So people needed to benefit from those. One way for people to benefit from those projects was through employment. One of the first places that we went to, probably the early 2009, was the Department of Transportation, who had still has a history of failure of meeting hiring goals and holding contractors accountable to hiring goals. We started by showing them their history and demonstrating it to them how bad their results were. We we politely asked them for meetings, and we tried to talk to them about the issues when they wouldn't discuss with them. We went to their building and advocated directly to them, filling in the bottom floor with hundreds of people. Lenny was part of this work before I was too, so I want to give him some credit for the work and has been a strong advocate on the issues that, Lenny's an expert on a lot of issues that I'm not, but he was there at the beginning and I wasn't, so I want to point that out. So flooding the floor, getting the attention of MnDOT, we had people training in the construction industry with tombstones representing each year of failure of the Department of Transportation to meet those hiring goals. We had people go to work sites, like Nekima was talking about, and actually look for people of color. People with clipboards and lab coats and binoculars marking down zeros when they didn't see people of color on these publicly funded construction jobs. This eventually got MnDOT's attention. They created, at the time, the MnDOT Collaborative to bring together different stakeholders related to workforce, businesses, the contractors are part of it, different government agencies, training institutions, community-based groups, to discuss issues related to their workforce problems. And I'm going to focus on MnDOT as I work through this because it shows sort of the path of our campaign and the path of the work that we've been doing. So that was an environment that MnDOT brought everybody together to try and have these discussions. It was incredibly tense for really up until, frankly, forever. I mean, it's still tense, but for different reasons. I mean, then it was clear nobody agreed on what the issues were and what we should be doing, and that's still partly the case. I mean, contractors felt like there weren't these significant issues. Government agencies thought they were doing what they should be doing or what they could be doing, perhaps. Community-based groups knew that things weren't right and weren't happening the way that they should be happening. And so that created a lot of problems in the room. Those never went away, even though we think that we've made some progress. We are seeing more people of color hired on jobs. We've seen some data from MnDOT indicating that people of color are working more on these projects. And then when we go look at projects, we're seeing more people of color. Doesn't mean that there's not problems anymore. And so one of the things that we've been able to do over that time is build a working relationship with the Department of Transportation. And so through the collaborative and other ways, we now know people who are actually working directly with contractors. We see data on a regular basis. So we can see that somebody doing a project in St. Louis Park or Hopkins is not meeting hiring goals. We can call somebody at the department and say, what's going on? Then they can explain it to us, and we can talk about the situation, provide solutions that we might have, relationships to training organizations. And then if those things still don't get resolved, then we will push directly on the contractor, and we will get them to come to a meeting, to meet with people of color, communities of color, people who are trying to get on these jobs, to say to them directly to their face. And that's been effective. On Central Corridor Light Rail, for instance, it was a really effective tool to get somebody from McCrossin who was not doing well on hiring of people of color, getting them face to face. Now McCrossin's still not doing that great, but they picked it up on that project, and that kind of tension and pushing them was really important. Really what I'm trying to say is that we are advocates, and advocacy is really important. There's different ways that we've done that, from direct action to meetings to building relationships to pushing directly on those who need to be hiring people of color, and we continue to follow that trajectory and Yeah, we think that we're making some progress, but there's still a long way to go. Thank you.
Who would like to go next? Keith?
Good evening. It's good to see you here. I'll start off by saying that, I wear a number of hats within the community. And I do want to begin by saying that I'm here representing Everybody In. And Everybody In is a collaborative of about 40 agencies and organizations, really centered on devising strategies and actions to really address the underrepresentation and the disparities of people of color within the workforce in the broadest sense, but also really intentionally focused in on the disparities as relates to African American and Native American or American Indians, because it is far more devastating a disparity than other groups, but it does not exclude those other communities that are affected by a number of barriers that exist for them as well, or for us all. As you start off, you talk about the Department of Transportation. I certainly am not here representing the Department of Transportation, but I work for the Department of Transportation. I manage the Consultant Contracts Unit, which is really the engineering work that gets a project to construction. So I'm not necessarily dealing with folks on the back end of the contracting and bidding processes, but I know it very well. As my background, I was formerly the Deputy Director of the Civil Rights Office at MnDOT from about 2000, or about 1999 till about 2003, when I took on my current position. Everybody In, what my role is there is really as chair of the Business Opportunity and Strategic Opportunity and Development for Small Businesses. Taking a look at what are the trends, where are the workforce demands, and trying to connect the development of small businesses to those future opportunities that exist in order to really help address disparities and employment issues through the development of small businesses themselves. So that at least frames the work. And I'll also say that because I have a keen understanding of the design side of the project, which is the arena that I have some experience in my formal job, because I understand the procurement processes and the systems that either invite or create barriers, both on the professional technical side and the construction side, I understand exactly some of the systemic issues, because I'm looking at it from the position or within the agency, and I'm also seeing the limitations in terms of the outcomes and the results. I'll also let you know just that it is going to be very vital for us to determine how best to build the businesses within the next 3 to 5 years in the construction arena. If I were to ask this question, how many minority, I hate that word, how many businesses of color, businesses owned by people of color, are there in the construction arena, whether we're talking vertical or horizontal? Anyone know? What's that? 82? Anyone else want to take a guess? 1,000? Okay. Well, nobody really knows that answer, and that's part of the issue. We've got certifications in all kinds of categories in all kinds of ways. Either you're a TGB, a DBE, a CERT, etc. But nobody really knows what the actual number is. Well, part of our strategy group was really focused and intent on finding that answer. And I'm just going to share this with you. Total pool of DBEs, TGBs, and DBEs.
What do those acronyms stand for?
Targeted Group Businesses, which is administered through the Department of Administration. Disadvantaged Business Enterprises, which there are three principal agencies that are responsible for the certification process, which is MnDOT, MnDOT, MAC, MET, and City of Minneapolis. That's correct. I did hear that. And then when it comes to CERT is really previously with Hennepin County, Minneapolis, City of St. Paul, etc. Ramsey County, correct. So those are the certifying agencies. Here's the number. DBEs that are businesses owned by people of color, 229. CERT. Nope. This is not a duplication. See, we got a system that duplicates, but I'm telling you, specifically, DBEs, 229.
But are you talking about construction businesses?
No. CERT businesses, 444. TGB businesses, 208, for a total complement of 804, unduplicated. What we did is we took the CERT database, we took the UCP database, and we took the TGB database, and we vetted through them to eliminate duplication. So it gives us a target of the pool that we actually are working with. Now let's get to the construction side, specifically the construction. In the construction sector, according to the NIC codes, there are 353 businesses, and they break down as follows. 101, construction of buildings. That's an oversimplification. There are several codes underneath that, but 102. Heavy and civil engineering, 31. However, tied into that a bit are specialty trades and contractors, which is 219. And then there's some miscellaneous other businesses that kind of fit into that. The reason why I think that is critical information, and we've done this not only in the construction arena, but we've done it in all NIC codes trades, because it gives us a starting place to say, when you think about the growth of activity, economic activity that is going on in this metropolitan area, it tells us where the opportunity for business exists. If we compare that to workforce demand, if we compare the list of businesses, where they align in terms of industry sector, to see if it aligns with the existing pool of businesses. And I would argue right now, a lot of the agencies that provide business development support, which there are a few, this is important information for them. This is important information for small businesses to understand where they fit. But the critical thing that I think is greatly absent is, okay, of all these 804 businesses, where are they on the continuum of readiness? And what mechanisms and attention and supports are available to get them from point A to point B? We can talk about capital. We can talk about employment base or labor. We can talk about in terms of bonding capacities. We can talk about in a number of arenas. And I think that that's what our strategy group is really taking a look at, is a way to move forward with that.
Thank you.
How y'all doing? You know, I use that term "y'all" because that's a good old country boy term. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with the word outdoors, outhouse, plow, mule. Those are the terms that these good old country boys we're talking about, who are construction workers, use often. My name's Lenny Chisholm, and I'm going to give you a little bit about my background, which will give you an idea of why I'm so passionate about construction and why I know we need this. I met Nekima when I was at the farmer's market many years ago with a group of kids who were trying to raise money to go to college, a college tour. And I said, well, let's go down to the farmer's market, and you guys put a card in your hand, you put a good smile on your face, and let's see how much money you can raise. And Nekima came along, her and her husband and kids, and bought one of their cards. 2 for $5, 3 for $10, so on and so on. Kids were making $80 an hour average, 4 kids, at the farmer's market. And the reason that the farmer's market is important is because that's what all of those good old country boys who are out there in the construction fields grow up on often. That's on those farms. How many of you know how to run a tractor? How many of you know how to hold a hoe, use a hammer? See, I grew up on a farm, and so the outfit I have on today is not an outfit to me. It's normal wear that I can go back all the way to 1965 because my grandfather wore it. And my grandfather had 80 acres of land, and he grew crops, and he sold everything on that land, and he made a good living at it. And in 1964, there was something called a Civil Rights Act. Am I correct? And in the Civil Rights Act, there was a portion of it called Title VI, which represented the opportunities for all people to participate on federally funded contracts. The part of that 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was all commerce. I mean, it was driven by commerce. And if you want to see the actual volume, just go over here to the public library and you can read it right down here in Minneapolis. The actual volume of the Civil Rights Act is in it. The other part of it was the Voting Rights Act, which was July 9th, 1965. Am I correct? That's actually an important day because that was the day I was born. So I can never forget it. So what happened about 2 years ago, they had to reauthorize the Civil Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act. And so those combined, and you analyze the numbers, and you say today, how much money are we participating on public contracts? And you tie those two particular pieces together. Now here's a number I want you to follow, and later on tonight we're going to really delve into it, hopefully. $981 was the last number reported from MnDOT that black contractors got out of $363 million. That's $981 from federally funded contracts from MnDOT. Now, let's translate that. Every gallon of gas that you put in your car, you pay 18.4 cents per gallon to basically fix our roads and bridges that are federally funded. The Minneapolis portion, or the state of Minnesota portion of your gas bill, is 28.4 cents. I'm sorry, 28.5 cents per gallon. Now, how many of you bought a gallon of gas recently? Now, if you're like me, I wish I didn't have to pay the 18.4 or the 28.5. But here's the thing, we don't have a choice. So a few years ago, how I got involved with the Department of Transportation was when they raised the Minnesota gas tax. And if you guys can recall, a lot of Republicans lost their positions in the Senate after they raised the gas tax, because that was an override of the governor who vetoed the bill, and then they came back to the Senate and the House and they overrode the veto to get that 28.5 cents. And some people went in and threw out some Republicans out of Edina and so on and so on. Now, where this comes to be important at is that when you look at who gets this money, if the federal government is giving $363 million every 6 months, and we're only getting $981 as contractors, we're supposed to be able to get the money as laborers. So I then asked the question, how much of that money did African Americans get as laborers? There is no answer to that. There is no data that they truly pulled together, and Mr. Lindsay here may be able to give us more insights into that. Now, if you think that's bad, then you look at the numbers that Asian Americans got out of that $363 million. And one of my good friends, Carlo Lakshmasin, can attest that his number was 0. Now, follow me. 0 out of $363 million, we couldn't find a way to get anything to that group of people. The Hispanics, they got $475,000 out of $363 million for the contracts, federally funded contracts. Native Americans, $175,000 out of $363 million. If you wonder where we're falling at in sectors, and we're unbalanced, that is considerably unbalanced when it comes to jobs in this particular community. If I'm going to open a business, I cannot open it in North Minneapolis. There's not enough income to support the businesses in North Minneapolis at this point. Because where's the money going? $363 million. We got less than $750,000 of that money. We have to open businesses other places. Now, that's the reality of the situation. Now, let's analyze how many people go to college. 9 out of 10 kids. 10 kids graduate from high school, maybe 9 out of 10 of them will not make it to college and graduate. We're talking maybe one kid, 10%. Some people here who do education will know more about that. So the rest of that has to be funneled through jobs that train them in roughly 8-10 weeks. Now, I'm a college graduate, The Ohio State University. First thing that Cargill did was put me in a training program. Now, mind you, I just got out of college. I thought I was pretty smart. First thing they said, no, go sit over in the corner. We're going to teach you the Cargill way. And that went on for 3 months. And I thought to myself, man, I'm super smart. I just got out of college. I know how to do everything. No. So if we have kids, and that's where this whole process comes into play, why it's so important to get that some of that money, because a lot of our kids are not going to go to college. They're not going to finish college. And when they don't finish it, they're going to get jobs. And those jobs, in many cases, are going to be jobs that have to be trained. McDonald's has something called McDonald's U, that they train every employee they go to. Well, McDonald's is trying to phase out the employees that take your money at the counter. They just installed 7,000 kiosks over in Europe to take money. Now, we're talking about $15 an hour for a job at McDonald's, and they're getting rid of those jobs. Now, where do those McDonald's workers go? Where do the steel workers go? All of these auto workers, St. Paul Ford plant, where do they go? MnDOT represents a significant chunk of federal aid. And some people say, well, if you get federal aid, if it's disguised as a job, it's not considered welfare. Well, I don't know. Does the check still say the federal government on it? It's still welfare under a different disguise. So, but we don't get any of that money. So we're struggling to get those jobs through this program. So as I sit here today, the one thing I want you to, if you remember nothing else, remember that $981 was all the African Americans got, contractors. So the number that we have to now try to get at is the employment number. And I haven't been able to show that we got much more of that. Maybe Hire Minnesota can explain, and they can tell us what those numbers are, because they're more into that data. But from what I could see, I couldn't get the data. So without the data, that's what translates to where we get jobs at. And right now, the city of Minneapolis is building a great project across the street. It's called the People's Stadium. I don't know about y'all, but I ain't seen many of my peoples working on that project. And that one is $1.6 billion. So we're not in here talking about the nice, college-educated people. We're talking about the basic people who need to get jobs from a construction level, who wear dirty shoes, go to work, and by the way, it's hard work. They go to work every day. They're going to sweat. They're going to toil. Their pants are going to bag. And it's not because they don't have their belts pulled up. It's because of the sweat that's dripping on their body. And that's what we're in the room to talk about today. How can we change that disparity of these jobs that are awarded for construction-related industries. Thank you.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Ken McCraley, and I'm the local president of the National Association of Minority Contractors. And more importantly, I own a company called KMS Air Duct Cleaning for the last 22 years. But as the president of the local chapter there of the National Association of Minority Contractors, just looking last year, our goal is to be a part of the development that's in this area, that's going on around the state of Minnesota, and to make sure that our contractors are included in that development. So as a part of that, as a board or as an organization, we asked ourselves, how do we get our minority contractors included? For years, we've tried a number of different ways to get included. And, with the goals on projects and kind of a more emphasis on bringing in inclusion, our thought is as an organization and as a board that we need to be a little bit closer to the development. So we were fortunate enough to find First Covenant Church, the church that you're in here. And our thought was we need to have a meeting place, a resource center for our contractors, and this fit the bill. We take up, 2,000 square feet in the lobby of the church, where our contractors are able to come make prints, get on the computers, more importantly, have a meeting place that we've never had before, whether it be the National Association of Minority Contractors or minority contractors, period. And so we were fortunate enough with First Covenant to be able to open up our resource center. And I'll get into that a little bit later on. But being in First Covenant Church has allowed us to talk to the development teams that are working next door at the People Stadium, to be able to have meetings and be right next to the development. But we kind of figured as an organization we need to go beyond that. And whatever's happened in the past, we've just called that the past, and we're moving forward with our organization. And as a part of that, we've said we need to do a few things. And that is get our contractors ready to do work. And have a serious conversation within our organization and say, who are our contractors? And those contractors, minority contractors, could be those guys that are driving around in 1 or 2 man operations in the pickup, that don't have a sign on their truck, but that you see at the gas station, every morning, that are going to work. Our contractors could be some of those ones that you see in those certification lists that have moved to the next step, that have been certified. Our contractors could be some of the ones that have their names on the cranes out there. But we know that it's important to our organization that we needed to have our members as a part of the dialogue. And it's just not on us construction companies to work on the dialogue, but to actually include ourselves in the dialogue. So we decided, with our organization, that we need to have some committees that are kind of spearheading, some of that conversation. And I'll talk about one of them in particular, and that is our teaming committee. And our teaming committee is bringing contractors together, looking at projects, bringing contractors together so the public can see on job sites that we have a concerted effort on getting to work. There's a few projects that we're that we're working on. There's a few projects that we've completed. And but bringing those small companies together, it gives us an opportunity to work on projects that normally 1, 2, or 3 man company normally wouldn't work on. So it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of funding to work on these big projects. And so that's kind of where we started at, from the National Association of Minority Contractors, on working on getting our companies on the projects. And as a part of the educational piece, we want to make sure that our companies actually are certified. And the certification process isn't something where you fill out one sheet of paper and you turn it in, or you fax it, or you email it in. It's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work for companies, majority companies, that have to give their financial statements. And it's an education process. So the city of St. Paul is kind of helped in getting that, getting that educational piece working. So just as a board and as an organization, in 6 short months, we think that we've made some strides. Made some strides that not only our organization has never made, but the minority contracting environment, period, has made. But we have some hurdles that we have to clear as well. And we really believe as an organization that minority contractors hire more minorities. But we have to have the opportunity to get to work. And I can tell you that over the last 6 months, being in this particular position, like I said, we've made a lot of strides, but we know now for our organization that we're going to have someone spearhead that, besides the guys that go to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and then put away their work boots and come to things like this. So that's kind of where we are. We know that there's a lot of agencies out there that are trying to get minority contractors certified. There's a lot of companies that are trying to include minority contractors. But we know as an organization, for our organization in particular, that we can only go so far. So, we're looking into the future, having an executive director, being able to have someone, bring all those pieces together. But I can tell you right now that if you're on a construction project, or if you're a part of a construction project, or if you're part of the management of a construction project, or in the architects and engineers, the start is to look at, inclusion, how you can get minority contractors included. And, if I'm at my house doing some work, and, obviously I'm in the construction business, I'm probably would hire my cousin who does framing because I know him, right? He might not be the best framer in the world, right? But I know him. I know all his, I know all the problems that have arisen in the past and hopefully won't arise in the future. And I think construction companies maybe kind of work like that as well. Maybe, we've worked with this guy for years, but it's, looking outside the box, whether that's a small project or, that's a safe project or whatever. I think knocking on the door of, of minority contractors, or looking for, a contractor that you normally wouldn't, could help our organization and obviously, could help, the inclusion process. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner?
Thanks, Nekima. A little background. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Department of Human Rights at the state level, that makes me a member of Governor Dayton's cabinet. There are 3 primary duties for the Department of Human Rights. The first is to investigate complaints of discrimination The second is to ensure equal employment opportunity exists on state contracts. And the third is the easiest one. That's simply to eliminate and eradicate discrimination in the state of Minnesota. We're really here today focusing in on state construction projects which are going on. The Department of Human Rights has a portion of the construction work that we're talking about. And I think that that's critically important to sort of understand that there are many players that touch upon this. So for the state, when the Department of Human Rights adjusted the workforce participation goals for people of color in Hennepin and Ramsey County, in Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Scott, and Washington, that was only if the project was being done by a State Department or agency, the Metropolitan Sports Facility, the Metropolitan Airports Commission, a Met Council project, or, you guys know the last one, right? The Metropolitan Mosquito Control Commission, right? If anybody else was building it, the workforce participation goals set by the Department of Human Rights do not apply. So, I mention it and I want to underscore that what we're really talking about and why we're all here, and it was sort of mentioned in everything which people have said, is that people feel that they are not participating in economic life in our country the way that they should. And one of the means to facilitate that is the public construction projects. But understand that we need to have a comprehensive strategy which is looking at it from all governmental entities. What goes on at the federal level impacts this. What goes on at the state level impacts it. What goes on at the county level impacts this issue. What goes on at the city level impacts this. This is not one situation where you go to one door, open that door, and then all the issues are solved. Now, for the Department of Human Rights, what can we do to sort of be a part of this? There was a mention of the multi-purpose stadium. I think the number was $1.6 billion. I think that's maybe a little bit high as it relates to the number for that. I see Alex Tittle here, the equity director of that respective project, who's doing a great job on that project, and I appreciate the work of the Sports Facility Authority. That's a project which we are monitoring. And the last numbers that I saw about 24 hours ago, the numbers for minority participation were in excess of 36%, and female participation on that project was in excess of 10%. On the capital restoration project for the state, again, the numbers were north of 34% for minority participation, and they were around 10% for female participation on that project. There are other projects which we monitor on our website that you can go and see how we are grading those projects. We identify the projects on our website for the projects that are over 10,000 hours. Now, are we achieving 32% minority participation on every state contract? No, we are not. Are we dramatically different and we have improved the numbers of participation on state contracts in the last 3 years? Yes, significantly it has improved. Does that mean that there will be spots where you go into cities around the metro area and you look at a construction site and you don't see as many ethnically diverse or racially diverse folks that you may wish to see, or gender diverse folks that you wish to see? That's probably the case. And that might be a situation because that jurisdiction does not have any diversity goals. So let me say it again. There are cities in Hennepin County that have no participation goals. There are counties that do not have participation or business inclusion goals. If people think that that's critically important, they need to advocate for that. They need to push the political system. So Lenny is exactly right in this to say voting matters. And I would say for the Department of Human Rights, voting matters. So 10,000 votes separates the last gubernatorial election for the Department of Human Rights. Had 10,000 votes gone the other way, I wouldn't have been commissioner. In the last 3 years, we have issued more discrimination complaints than any 8-year period in the prior 20. Let me say that again. In 3 years, we've done the work and issued more determinations than any 8-year period in the 20. You already heard me say we adjusted the workforce participation goals. Those goals went from 11% to 32%. Did I say elections matter? If we are going to make the movement that we are all here giving up a little bit of our night to be a part of, we need to think strategically about how to leverage workforce business participation goals on business entities, but not lose sight of what also is critically important, which was said by the president of the local NAMC here. And that is, we've got to look internally on how to build our own infrastructure and to support those respective businesses. And I really appreciate the work of Keith and what he's doing with everybody with Nekima to think strategically about how to support those businesses. I thank you for the opportunity to be here and answer questions from the audience. The department is here to try and push as much as we can on the respective part that we have, and then to also work collaboratively with other governmental entities and then other businesses, organizations.
Thank you.
What? Yeah, I was just moving the microphone. Actually, it just sort of reminds me of how my staff must feel, because I always tell them, silence is not an option. I will call on you if you don't participate. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessie Kingston. I'm the director for the Department of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity in the city of St. Paul. I've had the honor and privilege of being there for almost 2 years. It's a new department in the city. It's been around for just over 5 years now, and I'm the second director. It was formed in response to a lot of the issues that have been discussed here this evening. Low participation of minority, women-owned businesses, workforce, a lot of things that we have heard in the community. And we had a mayor that really led the charge and formed this department, which is one of the most unique departments in the United States. I'm not aware of any department that is formed like this, although we have had conversations with other jurisdictions, so perhaps they may be forming. The unique part of this is we do all of the procurement for the city. And by having that in one department, that allows us to take all of our outreach, vendor outreach goals, our workforce goals, affirmative action goals, all of that gets put into the bid. Because we also have our contract compliance team in there that does all of the monitoring. And they work very closely together on projects that are going out and setting those goals and working with the vendors to make sure that they understand what they need to do and make the responses of how they're going to achieve the goals part of the bid response. In addition to that, they do the prevailing wage monitoring in our contract compliance group. We do some workforce development and Section 3 monitoring. We also have a group that does investigations for alleged acts of discrimination within the city of St. Paul. And then it may seem a little odd to hear this, but we have a governmental in-house print shop, which has been very helpful and actually helps us with getting the message out. It's a little unusual, but we enjoy having them there. They're a great part of the family. When the department started, the numbers were pretty low when we looked at, in particular, the vendor outreach numbers and the business participation. For the few $100 million that the city was spending, only $4.8 million was spent with our SWIMBs. And through the work of the effort of having our compliance team as well as our procurement team aligned together, we can now say that we're spending over $105 million in 2013 on our business, our SWIMB vendors, small women, minority business enterprises, which is a great accomplishment in 5 years to move from 4.8 to over 105, but we know we still have a ways to go. We also know that we have increased the number of work hours to now over 1.5 million hours in 2013. We were certainly nowhere near that in 2008. Some of the ways in which we do that, we've got the partnership between the two divisions that work really closely together, but we also do that through partnerships with organizations. We have our construction partnership program that we support, manage every month with our certified vendors. We're bringing our primes and subcontractors together so that they can learn about the opportunities and make networking connections and move the needle forward. We also have spent a few times here. This has almost become my second home, where we've been trying to get our small businesses to have opportunities to meet with banks and get other financing opportunities that they didn't know existed. We partner with other businesses such as ProBid, LADC, and a number of other ones, as well as you guys, for technical assistance with the businesses. How do you participate and bid on a government contract? These are tools that we feel very strongly for. We also invest money in our workforce programs to give people tools and avenues to be able to get into the construction industry. But most importantly is the enforcement, and I'm really proud to say that we have a group that really is monitoring and working with our prime contractors to really say, you know what, it's not okay to just say, you know what, I didn't make the goal. It's how are you going to make the goal, being thoughtful. And, you know, when I started, it was actually a privilege to have met and sat with Avi and the members of Hire and Summit OIC to really get into the mindset of tracking where a project is going and to be able to catch early on and say, you know what, the numbers aren't trending the way that the plan is. How do you plan on making that up based on the number of hours? And if you haven't seen this tool, I would recommend that you chat with Avi afterwards to get a copy of that. It's been really helpful, I think, for a lot of businesses and for us to monitor that. The other thing, and I know that it was talked about that there are multiple ways in which businesses are certified. We are the lead agency for the CERT Collaborative for Ramsey and Hennepin County and the City of St. Paul. We have over 1,700 certified SWIMB vendors. We're very proud of that. We work very closely with those vendors to create opportunities for them to meet each other. The Lower Town Ballpark for the first time. I mean, I know it's not the People's Stadium. It's our ballpark for baseball, and I'm really excited to have that open. I can't wait to have baseball in downtown St. Paul. But for the first time since I was there, and I don't know if it was done even in the 3 years prior to me being the director, we actually had both a workforce and a business inclusion community meeting partnering with Ryan and brought together community organizations that support workforce and jobs as well as business opportunities and laid out the plan and gave them the avenues of how we want that door open for them. And so those are some of the things that we're doing in St. Paul. We're really excited about it. If you're an organization that we're not working with, please, come meet myself. If you haven't been certified, I'd recommend it. Cedra Jones is in the audience. She leads up the certification. We look forward to partnering with you. Thanks.
Thank you. So now, as I mentioned earlier, we have Julie Nelson here. You still live in Seattle, right? Yeah. From Seattle. And I want you to talk a little bit about the issues that you all had there, as well as how you address those concerns. Because that's the other area that we want to move towards. We know we have to lay out what's really going on here in terms of the disparities, but we also need some hope in terms of how to address these issues.
Nekima, thank you. And I just feel like I should say, since we're in this church and you say that I live in Seattle, I want to give a shout out to my cousins, Terry and Kevin Frizzell, who are actually members of this church. And I feel like I always have a home away from home when I'm in Minneapolis. So it's a pleasure to have them in my family and to have all of you in my family as well. I want to talk, Nekima mentioned the work that I did around contracting equity with the City of Seattle, but want to start with just a little blurb about the work that I'm doing right now with an organization called the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And actually just to pause for a second and think about those words that fit together and working backwards. So thinking about equity, because we use so much of the language, we use it all the time, but I'm not sure that we all are using it in the same way. So the terminology that we're using, equity, is what's fair. that when it comes to sort of things that we need in life, we all need jobs, we need housing, we need food, healthcare, education. Those are things that we all need, and whether we have equity, whether we have fairness, whether we all have that. In the third word, around race and racial equity, right now, across this country, no matter what indicator for success you're looking at, whether any of those, we have huge racial inequities. And so it's not just jobs, it's not just contracting, it's every single indicator for success. We have racial inequities in this country. And it does not matter whether you're living in a city where, sort of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Seattle, cities that think of themselves as sort of liberal progressive cities. Many of those cities have even worse racial inequities as other places in the country. And they're deep and they're pervasive. So I think that really recognizing that when we're talking about racial equity, we're talking about eliminating those across the board. Government, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, I will tell you, I worked for local government for 23 years for the city of Seattle. If you had told me when I was starting that I was going to work for local government for 23 years, I probably would have said, shoot me now. That I, starting out with government, I was cynical about bureaucracy. I knew the history of government, that you look at the history of government in this country, government has been responsible for the creation and the maintenance of racial inequities in this country. And so starting out, I had a lot of cynicism about sort of how much government had the capability or the capacity to actually change. And I'm cautiously optimistic right now that when you look at the history of change in this country, it has largely taken place because of community organizing from the outside. Every single movement that you see that has been a progressive movement in this country, it has been community that has led and has made those changes happen. What we see inside government right now is a new model for what government could and should be. Really thinking about what democracy is. That if we truly had democracy, we would not have racial inequities. And so the work that I'm doing, and I feel so fortunate to have both the City of Minneapolis and the City of St. Paul as a part of the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, we're really talking about transformation so that government does not perpetuate racial inequities, but indeed is working to eliminate them. So that's about the Alliance. The work that in Seattle that I did. The work that I did in Seattle led to the work that the Alliance is doing right now. So Seattle had a race and social justice initiative. I was the director of the Department of Civil Rights. Did enforcement of anti-discrimination law as one part of the office's work. We know that we would never be able to simply investigate our way to equity. That what we see is that biases have been baked into our institutions. And so when we're talking about racial equity or racial inequity, when we look only at individual acts of bigotry, that's not going to be enough. That we have to be able to look at the institutional and structural ways that inequities get perpetuated. So, quick definition, the definition that we use when it comes to institutionalized racism is policies, practices, and procedures that work better for white people than for people of color, often unintentionally. And I know a lot of you here have read some of the research around implicit bias. A lot of the brain research going on right now, people are not even, many people, not all of them, but many people aren't even actually aware of the biases as they're playing out. So it's so critical that we not just, think about sort of whether someone's an individual person is a good or a bad person, whether they're racist or not, but really step back and think about the way that our institutions are perpetuating inequities. So when it comes to contracting, City of Seattle had some work to do because 12 years ago, we had an anti-affirmative action measure that passed on a statewide basis. And that meant that we could no longer use quotas when it came, or requirements when it came to contracting. The distressing thing in the city of Seattle, sort of the political landscape, Seattle tends to be a more progressive place than the rest of the state. So I-200, the anti-affirmative action measure, didn't pass in Seattle, but it did in the rest of the state. So we were left to figure it out. And what we said at the time is that we believe, from a values perspective and from a financial perspective, that public investments should benefit the community that lives in our city. And that we had one tool taken away, but we weren't going to just roll over and, give up. That really, what we did was step back and say, okay, we have to expand the number of tools in our toolbox. And over the course of 12 years, I will say that there's a lot that we learned. And the first thing we did was, a good lesson learned. First thing we did was we acted as if let me say first that once it passed, the next 2 years, our numbers absolutely plummeted. That the number of contracts, the gross numbers, just plummeted overnight. Within a 2-year period, they, were literally, depending on the category, 85-90%. So huge reductions. So what happened first, after those numbers started plummeting, what we acted as if it was an information problem. So we need to do outreach to contractors of color. We need to get the word out. We need to do contracting fairs. We just need to get information out there. That strategy resulted in a little blip of improvement. Little blip of improvement, but it was nothing. It was really tiny in the scale of what we were trying to accomplish. So then, thinking about what we were doing around looking at institutionalized policies and practices, said, let's look at our practices. What are the requirements that we have in place that are causing us to get the outcomes we're getting? So that's when we looked at changing some of the things like bonding requirements. What had happened was sort of a gradual creep up that obviously from a government perspective, we need to have financial responsibility, have to have bonding, some level of bonding. But as the percent had increased year after year without looking at the impact, it was a barrier for contractors. And so we did an assessment and made some adjustments to bonding. Other thing around projects is bundling. That we knew that if we were doing these super big projects all in one gross contract, then there was going to be a bias towards those big firms, which are disproportionately white firms. And so debundling contracts actually led to an increase in the numbers as well. Two more things. The thing that we did most recently that actually just about a year and a half ago that I was actually really proud of because it entailed taking a risk. That our law department and elected officials had been really cautious, that we were kind of pushing up the legal boundaries of what many considered as, sort of what's acceptable risk. And as far as we can't, in bids, we can have contractors do aspirational goals, but we couldn't require subcontracting for contractors of color. And so what we did actually that took it a step further was that we said those aspirational goals are a requirement. And if a bid does not meet those aspirational goals, then we're going to throw them out. That we will say that it is non-responsive. That it's not okay just to say, we're going to say not applicable. And so actually changed that policy. And the very first time the policy was implemented was a remodeling project, major remodeling project of a community center in Southeast Seattle, which is our most diverse neighborhood. And every single bid that came in got thrown out. And that sent a strong message that people were. It was an incredibly strong message. So we threw every bid out and said we are going to rebid this process, and let us be clear. These are our goals, and in your bids, you need to be clear how you intend to meet them. And so then, a little bit of nervousness about sort of, what if all the bids come in and they're like twice as expensive, or, what if we don't get bids or any of those things? Well, lo and behold, what happened actually is that bids came in that were responsive, some of them incredibly responsive, with very high percentages, and they were less money. And so it was, to me, it was a really pushing the envelope story of government taking the leadership that it should when it comes to contracting equity. I want to say also, though, that these topics are complex. That in that particular story, we use a racial equity tool in the city of Seattle. Am I talking too long? And that we analyze policies and practices from a racial equity perspective. We use the racial equity tool on that process. We always try to talk about unintended consequences. With that process of contracting equity, the goal was obviously to increase contracting equity. The unintended consequence was that this was a community center in a community of color, that as a result of all those bids being thrown out, it was going to be 6 additional months that community center was shut down, and that the center provides really critical programs for kids in those communities. And so because we were using our racial equity tool, we talked about the unintended consequences and said, don't want to have that negative impact. We came up with some strategies of using schools and developed some programs in the schools instead of the community center to mitigate that consequence. Last thing I will say, I think I said that already once, I promise it's the last thing this time, is around sort of the capacity of employees. City of Seattle has 10,000 city employees. There's sort of a centralized function when it comes to contracting that cuts across all departments. What is really critical, though, in addition to that centralized function, is that contracting, procurement, consulting contracts all take place in individual departments as well. And so some of it takes place centralized, some decentralized. Having a group of staff across departments who really had strong ability to use racial equity tools in making decisions is what's created a whole bunch of momentum and traction. So really want to call out that collective approach.
Thank you. I found myself wanting to clap a few times as Julie was talking, because one of the things that the example that you gave to us shows is the importance of leadership and people willing to take risks, which is something that advocates here buck up against constantly when we're trying to challenge the status quo. There's a lot of fear. So I appreciate you two as well being on the panel representing government, because you've had to take some risks in terms of taking a stand and challenging the status quo. Unfortunately, that's not the case for many departments. So what I want to do before turning it over, because I know the audience may have some questions, I want to ask whether or not what's at the core of the disparities that we're talking about and the lack of access to opportunity is a result of bias. So in other words, where people are possibly intentionally discriminating against minority-owned businesses and laborers. We've heard a lot of stories from laborers who have conflict with unions from time to time. Laborers of color feeling as though that they're not fully accepted and given plum jobs, within a union. That's one thing. And then the other thing has to do with large contractors who perhaps at times are using minority-owned businesses as pass-throughs, so that the numbers look as though there's a higher level of minority business participation. But really, those businesses are forced to buy equipment that's maybe $100,000, $200,000, where they never actually benefit from purchasing that equipment. But again, the numbers make it look as though they do. So is this a question of bias, practices that perhaps are unethical, or is this a matter of a lack of a solid infrastructure that creates access for minority-owned businesses? So that's a lot, because I want you all to unpack it. We'll start with you, Lenny.
Well, my answer to that is fear. I mean, I don't see anything else but fear. If you're not mad as hell that when you see something in your community, and I look at your community, wherever you live at, is not being built or constructed by someone that lives in your community, then there's a problem. When I walked into North Minneapolis, I noticed that there was never any city workers that were getting shot after 5 o'clock. The people that were getting shot are the people that are coming out who have no jobs, et cetera, most times, who are working on in an economy that they've created on their own. So they couldn't go and suddenly say, well, let me call the police and let them settle my complaint here that I got with the guy that I gave something to sell to who didn't bring my money back. That's not what happened. But during the daytime, we would see all the city, and you can still see this, all the city workers are primarily people who are white. Now, if they build a new building across from the liquor store and everybody works on the projects white, maybe one or two people are people of color, is there a lack of employees that are available for the project? No. That's one of the things. So you have to be real, those things when they say take risk, first risk is you have to say, I'm not going to allow this to occur regardless of the fear. And if there's a better example than that is Ferguson, Missouri. They took a risk and they said, we are not going to let this go on. We're going to go out there and face whatever we have to, but we're going to bring this to the attention of the world, what just happened here. That's how I view these situations with contracts. If you're not willing to shut down a project, don't complain about a project. If we don't see enough people working at the stadium, shut it down. You don't see enough people working on the MnDOT site, shut it down. Until the people in your community, people that you know need jobs, are participatory. Because the rules are always going to say we can't be inclusive. There's a way to get those rules, so they always say we can't be inclusive. And the one rule for the DBE program, and it's the Disadvantaged Business Program for MnDOT, is that white women are the equivalent of every minority. Now, I don't know how that worked, but in 1987, that's one of the rules they put in place. You look at the city of Minneapolis. There were no commodity goals in the city of Minneapolis. So we went in and we're now trying to establish commodity goals because they could purchase everything directly and never include anyone. That's the city of Minneapolis. City of St. Paul had some issues years back. They went in and did the same thing, and I presume they're doing better. I haven't examined the data, but that's when we talk about how do you change this. You can't be fearful, because between the hours of 9 and 5 or 8 and 5, that's when all of this takes place, and they write them up real nice. And you walk in and say, oh, no, the rules say you can't do that. You say, well, who created the rules? This guy over here created the rules, called City Council. And it's supported by the judges, which is all supported by appointments from the governors. So the rules are what we are always facing, but you can't be fearful to change them.
Go ahead. Commissioner, and then Keith.
Nekima, I appreciate the question. It made me think about Dr. Algernon Austin when he came to the Twin Cities about 2.5, 3 years ago and said that the greatest disparity in the metropolitan area between whites and African Americans was right here in Twin Cities. And within that report, he said there were two things which were going on. He said the first is that there's an education gap. The second is that there's discrimination which is going on. And as commissioner, when I have talked about race equity, I say too often when I go and talk about trying to close and ensure that opportunities exist, the audience only hears one of those two. Either they hear it's all about education, or they hear that it's all about discrimination. And the truth is, this is not an or, this is an and. Now, is there discrimination and bias going on? For sure. For sure there is. But are there other things that we need to address and think about and be strategic about? That's also part of the equation. Before I became commissioner, I had an opportunity to sit down with a guy who was in this chair the very first time, Kwame McDonald, before he passed. And Julie, your point is spot on. He said, you're going to have to take care of the issues of investigating discrimination because that's called for. But you got to think about how you can be intentional about changing the paradigm as it relates to how we create opportunities for people. So we have as many conversations with education, MNSCU, the unions, as it relates to changing that pipeline and paradigm. We also have had conversations on streamlined certification as it relates to businesses because we got to change that part too. We got to think about this as an and, but not an or.
Yeah, I seriously think it's all of the above. I mean, certainly racism exists. It will exist unless it's challenged. And I do think external pressure is the only way systems change. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not the only way, but it's a primary way. I think we lack within our agencies, and I'll speak on behalf of folks who are administrators of programs. Okay, that's what I do. There is a lack of innovation. There is a lack of commitment. There is a paycheck that you get paid whether you meet an outcome or not. I hate to be that cynical about it. I don't think that in my 16 years in this arena of procurement that I've really participated with my colleagues from other state agencies to seriously understand and to talk about why are we not getting the outcomes we're looking for. Now, maybe an agency has done that, but not across systems. I work for the state. Well, that's one system. There's the city, that's another system. There's the county, that's another system. It's system on top of system without a comprehensive and straightforward discussion about where we're having success and where we're having failure. I get more calls to help small businesses understand how to navigate the world of, in this instance, MnDOT. Well, I don't necessarily know all of MnDOT, even though I've been there 16 years. And so when a question comes to me, I'm going to try to figure out, well, where is what I call an ally, if you will? Where's an innovator within the organization? And how do I link that individual up with that? I think we don't have enough innovators. I don't think we have enough people who are willing to think out of the box and to really ask the right questions internally, unless you're among, to a large degree, those who agree with you. Because it's easy to have the conversation around those that agree with you. It's more difficult to have the conversations with those who oppose your view or are uncomfortable with what your view means and what it means to change your relationship between your task or your job and change in how you do your job.
Did you want to respond? Go ahead. And if you're in the audience and you want to ask a question, just come on up to the microphone.
So on the part about infrastructure issues, I mean, at Hire recently in the last few years, we've definitely been focused on systems and systems around workforce and developing, access to training programs and recruitment and getting people into jobs, connections to unions. I mean, there's all sorts of, lots of pieces to this. A good example of what we've been doing recently is the employment assistance firm on the Viking Stadium, because I know we've been throwing out a lot of different names for it. I'm just going to call it that. We helped create and bring together community-based organizations who could recruit, train, and work to place people of color on the stadium. And so something along the lines of 150 people through that now are ready to work. Where we're seeing the failure is on the hiring side, and we hear good workforce numbers and all of that, but that's part of the other system, right? So we've created the pipeline. Now we need to get contractors to use that pipeline. And the reason I want to point to that is because, our MnDOT collaborative work has been really informative for me and a lot of this what goes on and why we have issues. So yes, the infrastructure is a problem. Yes, the systems are a problem. But on a monthly basis, I would go to these collaborative meetings and sit across the table from a contractor who would say, a white person, who would say something along the lines of, those people don't know what it's like on a construction job. Those people don't know what it's like to have to travel. Those people don't know what the things they're going to have to do to be able to do this work. And how demoralizing is that? I mean, that's demoralizing for me. I can't imagine what it was like for a person, a worker of color who wanted to get on one of those jobs. And that is a huge problem that we have to deal with. And thank God they're saying that to me in that room, and hopefully not to people just out on the street. I don't know, but it's the attitudes. We used to talk about at Hire, availability, accountability, and attitudes, the 3 A's. Availability, that's that workforce system. Accountability, that's the government piece, holding people accountable to those hiring goals. Enforcement. Attitudes, that's the contractors. That's where we need to see people actually be actively engaged in workforce systems and getting people of color into the industry. Because, nobody's throwing out demographic shifts, which is, I'm not sure that I've heard that phrase here. And that's something we always throw out there, more people of color, wave, whatever. Silver tsunami, I think, is a phrase that I've heard quite a bit. But the truth is that there is a business imperative there, too. There will be more workers of color moving forward. More people in the workforce are eligible to be part of the workforce. And so that's one part of it, the business model. But there's just also something about fairness, right? We broke down equity. You are part of this system. You are part of the society. You are taking money from all of us. You have to own this problem now, and you have to deal with it now. And that's hard. That is a hard conversation to have, but it's something that we have to say to people's faces as much as we possibly can.
Is there a way to get involved? Because you all sometimes show up at construction sites with picket signs, and there might be some adventurous people in the audience. How would they get involved if they're interested in that? Mel over here, Mel Reeves and I are the two people who would be able to best connect you with what we're doing. And please, page.
Yep, Facebook page. On our website, you can sign up for our email list. You can get our notices that come out. We're putting stuff up. I would say that. You asked a question about pastors too, and I threw out McCrossan out there a few minutes ago. I just wanted to bring up too that there are consistently they had an issue with the federal government on the Blue Line Hiawatha construction a number of years ago, and I'm going to keep picking on them because they're the easiest ones right now. But there are consistently examples of contractors who are not. I don't even know how you do as poorly as they're doing on some projects. You have to be trying. And so, we're always looking for examples like that and trying to work and push them in new and creative ways. And so we definitely want support and help as we're continuing to do that. So our website is hiremn.org. We have a Facebook page and the contact info. Email me, call me, whatever. We love to have people involved.
We have a question. Go ahead.
Sure.
Come up to the mic. Sure.
Good evening. My name is Alexis Penny. I wanted to say thank you so much to the panelists this evening for being here with us, sharing your thoughts, comments, and ideas. I wanted to say thank you so much to Nekima for being our moderator this evening, and thank you so much for helping put together this event. It's fantastic. Thank you. So my question is kind of a question, but it's more so I'm just trying to work through this myself, actually. So I serve on a number of different advisory committees for both the city and the county. Most recently, I'll be working on the Botno LRT work group, or Citizen Advisory Committee, if you want to call it that. We're having a meeting tomorrow night. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk in the news about Southwest LRT because of the lawsuit that was just filed yesterday. People are concerned about how we do this, where we do this, and I know that's a concern with Botno LRT as well. I know that's going to come about. There's no doubt about that in my mind because I've been hearing it for a number of years, actually. So my concern is, should I join that fight, to be honest with you? Because I feel like my role is, I'm in a weird role where I want to advocate for the project. I'm not ready to shut down the project. But at the same time, I think there's some real questions and concerns that need to be addressed. In addition to that, with the Botno line, I think there's also going to be a lot of low-income and affordable housing that will come right into the city of Minneapolis. And not that I'm opposed to affordable housing or anything like that. I think we do need that. Obviously, people are spending too much of their income on housing, transportation, so forth. But I'm talking about equity and having low-income housing in affluent areas and equally distributed throughout the region, actually. And so I guess my question is, how do I go about this? What's my angle? What role do I really play, actually? Because I guess I am supposed to be a voice to maybe change those paradigms, change the systems, and shut down the project if necessary. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm still, like I said, I'm uncertain.
Thank you. Anyone want to take a shot at responding? All right, Julie, and then...
You know, I think sort of to thinking about your question and thinking about sort of the comments about government and whether government has the capacity to be innovative. I mean, you're really sort of in an advisory capacity, sort of playing a role with government. I think the challenge is for us to recognize sort of our capacity to take advantage of the opportunities where they present themselves. And so, you know, much of this work can be really a little bit overwhelming, where, you know, I started by saying that we've got racial inequities, every indicator for success, they're deep, they're pervasive. You know, it can be overwhelming, like how do you tackle all of that at one time? But when you think about it sort of from an organizing perspective, and you're there, at, you know, on the Botno Advisory Committee, trying to do sort of thinking not just about putting light rail in, but about doing development that's going to benefit the community that lives there now, that's going to bring good jobs, etc. And so for you to think about sort of the organizing opportunities you have with your peers on the advisory committee, and at the same time, you know, like Nekima's doing that both at her congregation and at the university, that all of us in the room, the question is, how are we expanding our networks so that it's not just, you know, these forums are, I love, yeah, sometimes when people complain about, oh, we're just talking to the choir, it's like, I love talking to the choir. You know, sometimes it's what you need. But what we need to do going out of here is to build on this conversation so it's expanding. And, you know, I have lots of examples myself where things are slow to change. And in fact, one of the, this is many of these issues are all interrelated, but I was on a panel with the Seattle police chief a few police chiefs ago, and and we were talking about racial equity, and he kept going on and on and on about, you know, I want to support racial equity, but change is hard and change takes time. And the more that he kept talking about how hard change is and how much time it took, I just kept getting more and more angry, because what we have seen is that change does not have to be hard. It is hard when it's not a priority. When it is a priority and we feel urgency around it, it can change. A change can happen overnight. And I mean, it's true with contracting equity. It's true with criminal justice. It's true, education. You know, I just think about the fact in Seattle, 50% of African American, Latino, and Native American kids are graduating from high school on time. We really should. There should be collective outrage around that. And we have normalized so much of sort of our current situation that getting ourselves out of that thinking that this is normal. It is not normal. The more that we can, you know, not just organize with each other, but organize with our peers as well. And I intentionally use the word organizing, thinking about internal to government, even though it's most frequently the community that's organizing. We need to have internal organizing strategies too.
Go ahead.
I'll try to keep it quick because I know you guys about to get out of here soon. My name is Tyler Hubler, and I have the fortunate opportunity to serve as the AmeriCorps Vista member this year at Summit Academy OIC. So I've had the opportunity to hear from a lot of you that are on the panel through the convening on racial equity this summer at the U. And when I first started at Summit, I was talking to my supervisor, George Carnett, who some of you know, and we compared the issues of international development to being similar to what happens in inner city America and poverty. So I've seen, you know, the money argument where we can throw a lot of solutions out there and put a lot of money at a problem and it doesn't work. And we've been talking a lot about tonight about systems change and how it can be easy or hard. And fortunately, you guys sit in a lot of chairs where you do have the power to talk to people in power on a daily or weekly basis to get that change. And I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, and you can answer as much as to whatever extent you want. But what would be one solution that you want to see happen, that if you had an equity birthday gift this year from Governor Dayton or Mayor Hodges or Mayor Coleman, what would that thing be? It can be one sentence or two sentences, whatever works for you. For me, one thing that Dr. Levy-Pounds mentioned at the convening was that in horizontal construction specifically, there's not any money going to minority contractors. But part of that problem is a more capital-intensive part of the construction trade, and a lot of those contractors don't have the startup capital. So one of my solutions would be, some X dollar amount, millions of dollars from the state government to minority contractors to incentivize them to develop their business in the industry. And that's mine, but I'd love to hear yours too.
Thanks, Tyler. Anyone want to?
The one thing, and I think it's kind of tied together, and I do want to kind of address, one of the things that we really fail to fully comprehend is the importance of the engineering side of the work and how it translates to capacity building on the construction side. When you attend your meetings, the question really is, what information and where is the project in its development so that people who are trying to get on the construction side can have access to the information so that they can prepare for their participation on the project on the construction side. And that is, it's tied to the engineers and the architects. They set the framework, the specifications, everything that informs the contractor. So, it's an area where we don't spend enough time, and it's very, very vital. In terms of a gift for Governor Dayton, we really need to ask the governor to offer as a gift to shift the paradigm. We must have a business development infrastructure that is funded in part by the state. Because as contractors and as small businesses, one of the greatest challenges is the lack of resources that are available to move a business forward. Like I had mentioned earlier, there are several agencies that are in place to build the capacity of businesses. Yet we still are in the same place we've been. And I don't think that whether it's the governor, whether it's our legislators, etc., have put enough or directed the right resources in the right ways to create a development infrastructure for small businesses to help them move forward.
So in other words, you're saying if a small minority-owned business is looking to do work, let's say on the Viking Stadium, and there's a certain amount of money that's required, they're going to banks and lending institutions and they're saying no, even if that business has a track record of success, that could pose a barrier if there's no additional funding source offered by the state or some other entity.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that the answer is yes, but I'm not even sure that this development infrastructure, and this development infrastructure cannot be controlled by government. It really has to be controlled by folks who have deliberate intent for the outcome. Government can participate, but I don't think it's something that's controlled by government. Because government will act in its interest. And oftentimes its interest is not in small business development, although it ought to be, because we all understand that disparities have tremendous economic impacts on every single person here and their ability to live.
We have two questions.
Thanks for everyone's time. I'm a small business owner. Last year, I hired over 90% minority in my company. This year is about around 85%. Okay, the challenge I face, which I think resonate around most small business, is yes, I took the risk to hire people don't have quite the skill set yet, but the way I look at it, if you give them a job, they do it day in and day out, they're going to get there, right? But who's going to help you in the beginning to do that? That's high risk to do that. Secondly, finally now we are union, okay? My other challenge become most of my painters didn't have money to join the union. It's $500 a head. You want to join? Come up with $500. So then that burden is on us small business. Do I want to risk to pay that $500? This person may or may not work out. Keith hit it right on the head. Okay, if there are funding very strategically placed to help small business, I believe more small business willing to take the risk, because I believe in that. I believe if I'm given the opportunity because I'm minority, then that opportunity need to be shared among the minorities. But, the challenges is so huge, but I don't see any help from anybody. So, anyway.
So I'll have some of the other folks throw out their questions as well, and then as panelists, you can pick up on the one that you want to answer. One thing about infrastructure is the fact that there's no governmental office of minority business development, for example. So there's no central place for businesses to go.
Yeah, Nekima, thanks again for hosting this here. And that chair you're sitting in, somebody is responsible for having that chair put there. Anyway, Lenny Chisholm, are you going to sell that bow tie tonight, man? Are you going to sell that bow tie tonight?
It looks like a farmer.
Brother looks like he's a herbalist farmer, man. Anyhow, it gets serious here. I've been in this business community over 24 years. In several of the programs, the DBE, TGB, you name it, we've held our own to participate in projects there. I have held titles at the Minority Contractor Association on 2 different occasions. I also am a board member of a National Association of Minority Contractors out of Washington, D.C., and the various representatives you have here, a lot of things that they have said, resonate with me and my struggle to kind of move forward. And it's not only my struggle to move forward, but, downstairs we house the Minority Contractors Association, and I can tell you the hardships, for contractors of color, and more specifically black contractors. There is a significant degree of hatred in this community to give a black contractor a job. And that's a tragedy, and if we kind of go back to the programs, the DBE program that was initially initiated, it was for black contractors. And the DBE program, the federal program, a lot of the county and city programs were supposed to be mirroring that program. And it has been watered down. We talk about $981. Well, who got the rest of the $45 million? If those contractors are getting $45 million out of $363 million, then I say we need to graduate them and get them out the program, because, that's where our lunch money is going. And I can tell you, lastly, as Commissioner Lindsay said, it's politics. Heard President Obama said today that, we might not hold on to, or we might not retrieve the House of Representatives and Congress. But I tell you what, if we lose the Senate race in Washington, D.C., may the Lord have mercy on our soul, especially in this church here. But I can tell you, I'll do my own in this community to support what it is that we need. And I'm here to invite every and anyone on the 22nd of this month. That's a Monday from 5 to 7:30. I will be hosting Congressman Keith Ellison on a fundraiser, and we can get together again, similar like this year, and fill his ears with stuff that he needs to go represent us. But again, thank you guys for standing up for us here. And what we need is contracts. If we get a contract, we can develop proper businesses to move forward. Thank you.
Yes, kind of piggybacking on that, everybody, y'all know probably I don't have no questions. But I won't do a soliloquy either here today. I think that I attend a lot of these sessions, and they're pretty good. Really. I just don't think they're good enough. They're not good enough. Because once we leave out of this room, people are going to go back to doing the same things that they were doing before they entered and that they were doing yesterday. I think that what is lacking is courage, and especially among African Americans. I'm going to single out African Americans. We are losing by all known economic indicators. We have to be on the same economic indicators as everyone else in construction and all other industries. And what I notice that doesn't come out of these meetings is a strategic plan of action. What's the action plan? And when I ask people what the action plan is, they start getting real weak, because collectively we don't have one. And I think that that is one of the significant barriers besides the hard barriers. The hard barriers are mostly twofold. One, and I would ask everybody to go to your, what do they call those things? iPads or internet or whatever, and look at a book called The Black Metropolis. The Black Metropolis. Read that book, because you will discover that the same things we're talking about right now are the same things we talked about in the 1930s. Listen, the 1930s. I'm going to ask you guys as leaders to step up and come up with a strategic plan of action if you expect rank and file contractors, entrepreneurs, and workers to follow you. Right now, they are not following you. Listen, they are not following you. This is sobering, but it's the truth. Because the vacuum in leadership comes from government, and the rest of the country is really operating on the private sector when it comes to construction and economics. So you have to combine the political diaspora with the private sector, because the government, state government, federal government just doesn't have enough money. You have to create what's called a multiplier effect on that limited economy, which are the people of color. And people of color, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and take control of that plan of action yourself. In Minnesota, too many white people are carrying the day. Listen, allow white people to help you, because obviously they have more economic advantage and wherewithal than we do. But we have to control our own destiny and rely on good-minded people to help us. That's mine.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you very much, the panel. I learned some things. My name is Larry Tucker. I've been in business for over 40 years. I was around when they started the MBE program. We fried 50 chickens for the mayor, and he got us in. That's how we had an MBE, or set-aside program in the city of Minneapolis, 50 chickens. So we dealt with it from the grassroots. I'm concerned. My concern is that how many of you guys on this panel ever ran a business? And when I go into these government offices, I talk to people who have never ran a shoe shine stand and do not understand many of the problems that business people are faced with. The guy that did the light rail from Minneapolis to St. Paul took him 9 months to get paid. How many of you up there can wait 9 months to get paid? The other thing, the terms like minority, I've refused to call myself a minority. It's a negative term, and I do not use negative terms trying to get to a positive place. Okay, I think it's bad. I don't use the term racism. There ain't but one race, that's the human race. And when you go in a room, start using the term racism, you always put yourself at a disadvantage. You need to rethink the terms you use and how you express yourself. I find it frustrating to be called a minority contractor. What in the hell is that? You know, I think that there's a difference between education and knowledge, Mr. Lindsay. I prefer knowledge over education in many times. I think you have to express it in terms of knowledge. We have a lot of people very educated, but they're not very knowledgeable. They know nothing about business. And when you go into these government offices and talk to these people, it is frustrating. Being certification is another pet peeve of mine. I'm not going to certify myself with nobody as a minority contractor. When we have a green card like in South Africa, why would I go in and certify myself? Why can I not go in and bid on a contract like anybody else? And somebody tells me, well, we cannot accept you as a contract because you're not certified and we cannot use your numbers against our goals. What kind of nonsense is that? So we have to go in, we have to white face it. Some people find that to be a negative term. Let's tell it like it is. I white face it. I got a white boy and a white girl I put up front and let them go in so I don't have to go in and undress. I had a person from Minneapolis tell me, well, if you give me all your information, it's going to stay private. I did that years ago, and they went to every company I did business with and say, don't do no more business with him. He's getting too big. There's a negative side to that certification crap. There's a lot of black contractors and business people who do not certify themselves. You need to rethink this thing. And I think that the fact is that you do not have enough of people in government who understands business. And I'm always frustrated by the fact that they don't understand business. There was a senator, Rudy Boschwitz. When I went to Rudy's office, I never spent over 5 minutes talking to him because he understood business. And I did business with him when he ran plywood in Minnesota. I liked Wellstone. It took me 2 weeks in his office with his people trying to get a point across because they did not understand business. That's frustrating. You can't come out in the community and talk to folks that you need to do A, B, and C, and you don't understand how the process works. The political process is crucial. Fear and ignorance, as Mr. Chisholm says, are twins. That's a term that was used by this guy called Whitney Young, who ran the Urban League in the 60s. Fear and ignorance are twins. The greater the ignorance, the greater the fear. And since we do not have enough people who understand business, that's our frustration. And I think you first need to understand business and how it works and how decisions are made and who makes those decisions. We had a legislature that told me, I don't care what Bobby Joe and Linda Higgins put in committee. It'll never get out of committee because I'll do everything I can to kill it. Okay? So when you understand how the game is played and who's playing the game and where the power lies, then you can make changes.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. And thank you very much, Mr. Earl, for just giving us the salt. Because I think in this day and age, since I was born, because I think Ray Marshall came in like the 70s, Department of Labor, and kind of switched things up. But we don't know how our generation, and I think the people who are in power have a hard time eating both the salt and the sweet. And so I appreciate that. I wish you were in the panel, too. My name is MK. I'm a resident of Frogtown, grew up, born and raised. My parents own a small business there. I remember 8 years ago when I was invited, me and my family were invited by other community members from Rondo to a meeting about the light rail that the Metropolitan Council had organized. And I remember not being invited to meetings beforehand when a whole bunch of decisions were made about my community, and it was just a presentation. So I went away for about 8 years to just do some more studying and really understanding how our community and the labor and the love and the genius that comes from that is owned by us. And I was hearing that I'm just agreeing with a lot of what folks have been sharing in terms of what we need. I agree that we do need paradigm shifts. I agree that that government does act upon itself, right? Its own self-interest. And I think with those two kind of ideas combined, I could see us developing kind of a new way and a new way of doing things, right? Where we're no longer investing in organizational models that were designed under the industrialization era. That my hope is that we see in Minnesota more partnerships between labor and community, like real, meaningful, authentic ones in which our community is not incorporated into somebody else's plan, but that we are part of the decision-making process from step one to step whenever. And so, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit emotional about this. My question is, I think, and I just wanted to share, like, Mr. Earl, you had shared that, they don't know, our people in government don't know business, right? Like, I think they know big business, but I don't think they know small business. I don't think they know average Joe business and family business. The way that I see since Ray Marshall became Department of Labor Secretary, we've just seen this shift where a lot of our organizations or a lot of our public entities are being privatized, and power, public power, my voting power, my tax-paying power, is diminishing, right, as I now pay taxes. And so my question is, what conversations have we had around community benefits agreements? And two, how do we address this issue just from the very beginning before we talk about designing and implementation and procurement and appropriation of the budget? Like, when do we get to decide where our own money goes, and where is that in terms of labor and your organizations? Like, where are we in the conversation with that?
Thank you. So I'm going to ask for very brief responses from the panel since we're out of time. But I want to make sure we at least touch some of the things that were raised.
Yeah, I want to speak on the business aspect on the certification. As being a minority business or on a certification list, I don't mind being on that list because I know that as a business, that can't be 100% where I'm drawing business from. That just has to be a small percentage. It has to open doors for me when I walk into those doors and know that I can make relationships that I normally wouldn't have. So, I know being on those certification lists, there's a lot to it, but for me, I look at it as a door opener. As for businesses and minority businesses on agency projects, I think what needs to happen is, when in the post-project, the pre-project bid sessions, we need to say, well, you know what, if a union contractor gets this work, here's the way that non-union contractors can participate on this project. Here's what the PLA says for this particular project. That's never said. It's talk to the union, and if you are union, and if you are a small minority companies, I think it needs to be said, what are the pitfalls that have happened on these big major projects, whether it's a light rail or the capital projects or other projects that have happened. So we need to say, what could happen, minority contractors, is a contractor might ask you to buy $5 million worth of steel. And they're going to give you 2%. But, you're going to have to ship that steel, warehouse it, and have to pay for it before you get paid. Or we need to talk about payment terms. What's happened in the past is a general contractor has held your money for 90 days. We know that you just turned union or you have these, you have these expenses and you're a small company and you can't afford not to get paid for 90 days. So you have to think about that going into these big projects. But I think some of that should be addressed, when we have these pre-bid meetings or before the contracts are signed. Because I can tell you, our organization just had a meeting with the union, and I'm not pro union or against the union or what have you. But the discussion needs to be made is what are the downfalls of if you're a contractor who's becoming union or you're already union and you're a small company, what are the downfalls? What has sucked up our minority contractors, in these projects or even smaller projects? So I think that needs to be addressed. And by the way, go ahead.
I'm sorry guys, we're going to have to table that just because of the fact that we're out of time and I want a couple more panelists to respond, if that's okay. Go ahead.
I only got really one statement. That young lady right there is exactly what I'm saying about facing your fears. She stepped up to the mic. I heard her voice shake a little bit, but it didn't stop her. Everybody in the room felt her passion and understood what she wanted. And when you walk in the room, that's what you have to have. Your voice will stop shaking a little bit, and you'll get more confidence as you go in. And those are the things that we need to see during the hours when they're making the decisions. If they know that she's going to come in that room, they will change their tone. If they know that he's coming in the room, they'll change the tone. That is the essence of what public policy is all about. Don't be afraid, because at the end of the day, and I heard a term this weekend that I really thought was interesting, they're going to spend those dollars anyway. So why not let those dollars be spent with people that you know? And that's the way to get it, is that what she did and what this young man over here was talking about. Shake the foundation, because if they ain't going to let you, if they're not including you, then ain't nobody getting none.
Jesse?
Sure, I'll just go ahead. I just want to address the question about talking to elected, or the comment about talking to elected officials about business and what they know or don't know. I think it's really important for all of us who do have those experiences to share it directly with them as consistently as we possibly can. From a work perspective at Hire, one of the things that we try and do is at committee hearings, make sure that people affected by the issues are the ones who are up there talking up front, sharing their personal stories and their connections. And then a little personal story. I mean, from my perspective, we are a small business owner. It's not a construction firm, but my family owns a small bakery in St. Paul, and man, it is hard. You talk about 9 months without receiving a check. It happens all the time for us over the last 4 years. It's a bakery, and so I like to say that we get cupcakes and cookies, but not cash. It's and for a while I would tell, elected officials, people who I knew would come up and say, hey, how's the business doing? How's everything going? And for a couple of years there, I would just say, yeah, good. Things are good. They're moving along. And then at some point I realized that wasn't doing me any good, and nor is it helping them understand the issues that people who own small businesses are going through. And I just started saying, it's horrible. It's terrible. It's rough out there. Things are really, really, really hard. And then they weren't ever prepared for that. You could see their face like, maybe I shouldn't have asked. But it was important to say that to them, and then they started asking different questions and started trying to think about things differently. It takes a lot of time and effort and emotion to be able to say that to somebody and admit those things to people when you're working your butt off and trying to keep something going. But at least in those moments, I could feel a connection and understanding, and I had some hope that things would be different and improve. So,
Jesse?
So I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the discussion about leadership and change and what we're doing and hearing comments. Since I've been, in my position, and I come from the private sector, and when I came to government, I was told, government moves really slow, you're not going to like the pace, you've been at, companies like General Electric, they move fast, and I've come in and, my philosophy is smash the box, it doesn't exist, let's throw every possible idea up on the wall. And for me, it's actually been really amazing because there are people on this stage that actually are really committed to this issue of equity. And I remember coming in and hearing Commissioner Lindsay set the goal at 32%. It was a lofty goal. We'll never get there. And yet we form partnerships to advance the hiring goals, to advance, people actually getting hired, businesses working. Are we perfect yet? No. But you have people who are actually committed and are listening. I've heard the issue of 90 days. My staff has brought it up to me for payment terms, and we've said, let's think about this. How can we do this? And we look at the process, and we drill into these things and are constantly refining and making changes. And perhaps we do need to look at how we're communicating that out. And I don't want people to come and listen to panels and think that nothing is changing, but things are changing. And we need to keep that in mind, that there are people who are dedicated and committed to this and are in positions that are here to help. We spend a lot of time trying to train our folks to understand businesses, to be able to help them. Some of them may not have had that training before, but again, we have people committed to make that help. So, if there are specific things, I would welcome the conversation to hear some other ideas and challenges. Can't guarantee they're going to be resolved in 30 to 60 days, but we will certainly be committed to trying to figure out solutions for them.
Well, the other thing is that it's an election year. So that might be a good time to raise some concerns with certain governmental offices. Governor Dayton, but no, go ahead.
I just wanted to say in closing thank you that as a person who's only here part of the time, that it is such a pleasure to see the outstanding work that's going on, and much as I know it's frustrating and we want it to happen more quickly, you all really are doing some amazing work, so kudos to you.
I was thinking about the history and sort of this question about how fast we're moving, are we making success? I was thinking of the book Standing Fast, which is the autobiography or biography of Roy Wilkins. And there's a passage in there where he is going to President Roosevelt, and he wants Roosevelt to exercise some political capital to try and get an anti-lynching bill through the Senate. And he's told at that point, President Roosevelt tells Wilkins at that point in time, he doesn't, as the president, have enough political capital to have that conversation with the Senate. Now, we're not talking about business contracts or education. We're talking about fundamental due process so you don't get strung up on a tree. And the President of the United States does not think that he has the political capital to do that. Okay? So Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. There has to be demands which are met. There has to be organization. There has to be agitation. And that has to be consistent. Do not think just because someone is elected within one position that they have the power to wave a magic wand and get everything done. Democracy isn't free, right? We got to keep that in mind. If we want to try and make the democracy fully engaged for all, that is a commitment from everyone on stage, and that's a commitment of everyone in the audience.
Last comment?
Yeah, I appreciate so much Commissioner Lindsay's comment. I came here with my hat of everybody in, because that's what I'm representing, but I'm taking a very, very clear and close eyeball at a large agency, which we've heard MnDOT mentioned here more than any other agency. Now, I work for MnDOT, and I have for 16 years, but I'm also here to say that within the arena I have the greatest sphere of influence in, we do 15 to 20% contracting, and that's on the professional technical side. Okay. In my unit, we know how to get it done. And we try to lead by example. But it is your responsibility to hold me accountable. It is. I'm not always comfortable with it, but it is your responsibility to do that. Because really, you along with myself, help pay my salary. Okay? But the point that I wanted to make is this. When it comes to political involvement, decision makers, people who are making decisions, don't make decisions against you. They make decisions in their interest. And that's really different. You got to shift how you look at it and how you think about it. When we are absent at the table, when decisions are made, they're made in the interest of those around the table. You asked that question. So you must be there at the table. The other thing that I think is important to recognize is that there are some incredibly good things going on out there that you may not be connected to. And I guess I would say find a way to link with people who are doing very creative and innovative things. Because there's more going on. But we do have a mindset to sometimes be overcritical of ourselves to the degree that we undermine the very people that are trying to be supportive and move the dial. It's okay that we disagree, but it's not okay that we stop working together.
Let's give our panel another round of applause. Thank you for taking the time to be here today, for sharing your insights with us, and for challenging us to get engaged. If there's nothing else that you leave here with today, it should be a sense of responsibility for getting involved and for advocating for what it is we need to see. Many of us are in meetings too often where people are afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge the status quo, and then complain when things don't change. So we need to use our voices and decide what we care about at the end of the day and be willing to fight for it. Because another quote by Frederick Douglass is, without struggle, there is no progress. So expect that struggle is a part of it, and that's okay as long as we are working towards the end goal, and that is equity for all. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you for being a part of this forum. Don't stop the work because this forum is over. Keep it going. Thank you.